It will be moderated uh, by my friend Dr. Arief Ramayandi. Just to give you a brief background about Dr. Arief Ramayandi, currently he's working as a senior research economist at Asian Development Bank Institute, Tokyo, Japan. Prior to his appointment at ADBI, he was a principal economist in the Economic Research and Development Impact Department of Asian Development Bank. Before ADB, he was the director of the Center of Economics and Development Studies in universities in Indonesia. Uh, Dr. Arief holds a PhD in economics from Australian National University and has published extensively in the field of macroeconomics and development. Thank you so much, Dr. Arief Ramayandi. Now I'd like to hand over the floor to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Adil. And we are now entering the paper presentation sessions. We have three very nice paper to be presented and discussed. And we also have 6 very distinguished paper presenters as well as discussants lining up in our session today. So we will start with the first paper by Professor Iwan Jaya Azis, who is currently a professor of emerging markets within the Dyson School of Applied Economics and Management, Cornell University, where he has taught since 1992. Professor Azis has been consulting different governments across Asia, including Japan, Australia, Singapore, and Indonesia. And he also has held a position of heading the Office of Regional Economic Integration at the ADB before. His presentation will be discussed by Professor Masahiro Kawai, who is currently the ADB Institute Fellow and a Professor Emeritus at the University of Tokyo. Professor Kawai is also a senior fellow at the Policy Research Institute of the Japan's Ministry of Finance, as well as a distinguished research fellow of the Japan Forum on International Relations. Professor Azis' presentation is titled Charting Asia's High-Income Future, the Strategic Role of Regional Cooperation and Integration. The presentation will be given about 30 minutes, followed by 15 minutes discussion by Professor Kawai, and then we will use the rest of the time for a Q&A session. Professor Iwan Azis, please.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to the Asian Development Bank Institute. And it makes me feel very happy because it's almost like going quote unquote home, since there was a period where I come to ADBI on a regular basis. And of course, meeting old friends, including Kuroda-san, who just finished speaking, and my good friend Kawai, who I assume is going to be the discussion of this paper. Now, given the time constraint, let me just highlight 3 points. And the first is about the main message that I'm trying to convey through the paper. So let me share my slide here. I assume that the slide is already shown here. So basically, the main message that I'm trying to convey is the following. If we trying to sum up what is going on with the RCI in Asia, I cannot agree more with what Kuroda mentioned earlier. Basically, there is already a relatively high degree of integration, especially in trade area, as well as in finance. And everybody, myself included, believe that in the world of finance, the integrations will even intensify in the coming years, especially with the digital finance, all kinds of technology, as well as integration in infrastructure. Now, that kind of relatively good picture on RCI is unfortunately accompanied by a persistence of a number of what I call development asymmetry, because many of the Asian countries are suffering from a set of social, demographic, as well as environmental problems. On top of that is really the issue of inequality and so on, which I don't want to elaborate further here. I think many of us knows about it. And also the fact that there are some degree of institutional fragmentation within the region, especially if we talk about the organizations like SARC, CAREC. Now, Guru Dasang correctly mentioned that the most advanced kind of cooperation and integration in Asia is among the ASEAN plus 3. But if we look at the other parts of Asia, there's some degree of fragmentation in terms of the institutional arrangement. And of course, on the security and political side, there are some degree of problems with the trust. So there's a fragile trust. Now, but overall, if we look at the economy of the regions, it's relatively doing well. One simple indicator is the last 5 years, if we look at the global growth, 60%, 60%, the source of the growth coming from the region, coming from Asia. So it's no doubt that Asia is doing relatively well. With all this strategy and policies along the line with the RCI, Regional Cooperation and Integration. Having said that, however, I think Guru Dasang mentioned that things have been changing in a number of fronts. There is a global fragmentation, and also there is some degree of global liquidity, which is quite strange here because a number of advanced economies started to sort of adopt easing monetary policy. But if you read the latest IMF report on the global liquidity, they are worried about the restrictiveness of the global liquidity. So, you know, the fact that the past Asia has been doing relatively well, but now and in the coming years, there will be a lot of challenges, including the global fragmentation, geopolitical situation, and so forth. That leads to the question, what should Asia RCI doing in the coming years? Now, logically speaking, everything that has been doing well or served very well the region, we should try to maintain that. I think one of the things, the most important feature of the RCI in Asia is the open regionalism. So we have to maintain that open regionalism. On the other hand, things that did not really serve well in the past, maybe the region have to start to think about replacing them or exploring alternative things. So that is basically the message of the paper that I'm trying to convey here. That's point number one. Now, let's start with the fact in terms of the integration itself. I think because of the time constraint, I cannot go into the detail with all the tables. Let's just focus on those numbers here. 55, 50, 18, 20, 75, and 70. 55, that is the percentage of the intra-Asian trade. So if the total trade in Asia is 100, basically 55% is among Asian themselves. That is pretty high, considering the fact that Asian trade is not really like in Europe in the sense that we do not have really a strong institutional apparatus. So behind that high intra-regional trade, there was a relatively light institution. Even the fact that there is a lot of the FTA, free trade agreement, but most of that 55% is not because of the FTA, but it's because of the unilateral liberalization taken by individual country in Asia. That's the 55. Now, 50. If you look at basically the FDI in Asia, again, let's say the total FDI is 100. Half of them is really within Asia itself. So again, that number is quite impressive, given the fact that there is an institutional light, unlike in Europe and so forth. So that's the story of the trade and FDI integration. Now, on the financial side, as expected, it's less than in the case of trade. So 18, what is 18? 18 is the 18% of the intra-regional equity transaction. So in other words, if the equity, the stock market in Asia is 100, 18 is among Asian countries. Okay. And then the next one is 20. That is bonds. That's the debt market, basically. So it's, in general, in terms of financial integration, Asia is more, I would call it, global bias rather than regional bias, meaning that the equity and bonds market in Asia is more interrelated with the advanced economies, the G2, Europe and the US and so forth. Now, the next one is 75. That's the cross-country within Asia in terms of bank asset. That is pretty high, okay? And that does not include a number of, countries within Asia. For example, +3, Korea, Japan, and China has been active in, supporting a number of projects in ASEAN countries. And for that, they have to open account and so forth. So I'm only looking at the data of the bank asset, 75%. That's pretty high. Okay. And last but not least, the 70. That's percentage of the people's movement. Okay. And that consists of three components. One is the labor movement. The second is the business movement. And then the third is tourism and so forth. So again, as I indicated earlier, in general, Asian regional integration is doing relatively well, despite the fact that the institution is not as strong or as formal as in Europe. Okay. Now, of course, within Asia, there's a story of fragmentation, because that's why if you look at the chart here, I started by ESE, that is East and Southeast Asia. I think that is the most developed in terms of the RCI, and then South Asia, that's SA, and then Central Asia, and then the Pacific region. Okay, now that's basically what happened in terms of the RCI, the status, if you wish, the status of the RCI in Asia. Now, another way to look at the degree of integration is by not only looking in terms of the flows of the trade or flow of FDI or flow of capital and so forth, but looking at the impact of that interdependence. So in other words, if there's an increased production in China, what will be the impact on ASEAN economies, or vice versa? If there's an increase of production in ASEAN, what happened with the productions in +3 in Korea and Japan and so forth? Okay, and one measure for that is called the coefficient of interdependence. Now, if I look at the coefficient of interdependence over the years, and I'm using the ADB data here, up to 2024, definitely there is a trend of increasing. So, in short, no matter what indicators that we are using, RCI in Asia is improving and doing relatively well, despite the fact that the institution is light. In terms of the ranking, trade is the most integrated, followed by the finance. Okay, I'm not too worried about the relatively low degree of integration in financial sector, because we all know that the asymmetric information in financial world is much, much higher than in the goods world. So in other words, the risk is also high, because we know that integration provides all kinds of benefit and opportunity, but at the same time, it also provides risk. So, as far as the safety net, like the CMIM, for example, as far as the safety net is not fully ready yet, I think the degree of integration in financial sector in Asia is relatively optimal. Now, having said that, in the coming years, as I said earlier, I believe it will be even increasing because of the technology, because the digital finance, and then local payment, the use of local currency, and now using the QR and so forth. So I'm seeing the coming years, the financial integration in the regions will be increasing. All right. Now, the next message that I'm trying to convey in the paper is that what is the RCI? Why a country is sort of motivated to join an RCI? There are a set of benefits as well as a set of risks and costs here. Now, the benefit is clear. I think President Kanda mentioned earlier, expand the market. Absolutely, and that is going on in the region. Expansions of the market, not only in terms of the market for the final goods, but also for the inputs. So market for the input is also important. And one clear example in Asia is really the strong production network, supply chain, and so forth. So that is one area that is really positive coming out from the RCI. Now, on the other hand, there are some externalities that are relatively negative from the RCI. And one of them in the area of finance, for example, is really the contagion. I think Asia learned the hard lesson in 1997 about the Asian financial crisis. And that was the reasons why a number of countries, including the three countries, Korea, China, and Japan, established the CMIM and so forth. So financial contagion is something that one has to be very, very careful in looking at the implications of too close financial integration. And that is the reasons why one of the messages in my paper is trying to appeal to make the CMIM more ready than what it is now. I think I don't have time to elaborate that, but my paper is clearly indicating that CMIM has to be strengthened. Why? Because I believe in the coming years, the global financial sector is not going to be stronger. It's not going to be more safe. It's not going to be less volatile. I think if anything, it will be more volatile in the coming years, right? Now, given all that, as I said earlier, now we are facing new challenges. The geopolitical situation. And on the other hand, many of the Asian countries are also doing relatively well, meaning that their economic fortune has been improving. And one of the indicators that I show in the paper is there is a degree of convergence, meaning that the gap between the poor Asian countries and the rich Asian countries has been narrowing down. So that is good news. And that is also part of the results of the Asian cooperation, because one other very nice feature of the Asian cooperation is that the adoptions of flexibility, or I think I call it differentiated implementation. So for weak countries, they do not have to abide to the strict rule that has been agreed by the majority of the members of whatever organization, whether it is ASEAN plus 3 or ASEAN and so forth. So in other words, they give more time and more sort of room for the weaker member to improve themselves. In addition to that, ASEAN and ASEAN plus 3 has been also very active in providing capacity building. And all of this contributes to the degree of convergence within the region. And to me, that is one of mostly neglected kind of goal of the RCI. So yes, RCI is important to expand the market. RCI important to get more sort of lower cost of capital and so on. But at the same time, RCI is also intended to make all members to become not exactly the same, but to be less unequal in terms of the gap. We are expecting that the gap is narrowing down. And it is happening in Asia. So the gap in Asia has been narrowing down. And this is the one that leads me to the main message of the paper going forward. Now, I can identify at least 4 things, given all the stories that I just mentioned earlier. Given all the uncertainty, global financial condition is getting more volatile, and the geopolitical situation is getting more hardened. The fourth line is getting more hardened, and so on. There is no other way that we need to double down the RCI. Double down, especially the components of the RCI that has provided a success and positive results so far to the region. That's point number one. Point number two, take the advantage of the nice feature of the Asian RCI, which is open regionalism. Now, what does that mean? I think everyone knows that many of the Asian countries now is under pressure to take side, whether we are taking the Beijing side or Washington side and so on. And at the same time, many of the Asian countries are reluctant to do that. So what they need is really to take the strategic balance kind of activities. And open regionalism is one sort of a vehicle that allows Asian members to take that kind of strategic balance. Now, one implications of that, I think it is time also for Asia to explore the possibility of having cooperation with non-Asian members. And I think many of the Asian members are already doing it. One example is a number of countries in ASEAN already joining BRICS, for example. So open regionalism is a feature which I perceive as one of the most positive things about the Asian RCI. And given the current global situation, we need to take advantage of that open regionalism by exploring the possibility of having RCI with non-Asian countries. And I mentioned in the paper, one possibility is cooperation with the global South countries. Because if I look at the data of the global South, basically it's about 80% of the world population, about 50% of global GDP. And then if you look at the South-South trade, the last 5 years, the trade among South-South countries has already doubled. I think by now it's reaching something like $6 trillion US. And so there is a room for Asian countries to explore kind of a possible RCI with non-Asian members. The next one, and this is another sort of success story which we need to emulate and we need to keep. As I said earlier, we learn from the past, and given the challenge in the coming years, let's try to keep what is working in the past that support Asian good performance, which I indicated earlier. And that is multilateralism. You know, we have RCEP, we have CPTPP, and so forth. We need to expand those kind of cooperation that will be more in line with the principle of multilateralism. I think everyone knows that the current situation is very sad because WTO is dysfunctional and multilateralism is under threat and so on. Asia can take the lead by showing the example, by using whatever the institution that is in place, including RCEP and CPTPP and so on. So the third one is really trying to pursue the principle of multilateralism. The last but not least is the intensify the capacity building that will help weaker member of Asia to become stronger so that the gap between the rich and the poor within Asia will be narrowing down. So I think that's the key message of the paper that I'm trying to convey here. Now, unfortunately, I was given only, I think, between 6,000 and 8,000 words. And I think my current draft is already exceeding 8,000 words. I wanted to say more and I want to show more data and so on, but unfortunately, that space constraint did not allow me to do that. Anyway, thanks again to ADBI for inviting me to this important and very timely. I strongly believe that this is a very timely topic to discuss given the current geopolitical situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Azis. I apologize that we are giving you some limitation in terms of numbers of words, But we are at ADBI. Welcome you very much if you wanted to contribute some of your thoughts in terms of blogs or policy papers going forward. So please, Professor Iwan. Let me now continue with a discussant from Professor Kawai. Please, Professor Kawai, your time is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to make my comments on Iwan's very interesting paper. Basically, I have almost 100% agreement in terms of his argument on RCI, his conclusions. But perhaps on a few points, I have somewhat different views. But basically, I don't have a substantive disagreement with Iwan's paper. I have my PowerPoint. Can I share my PowerPoint?
Yes, you can, Professor Kawai.
Okay. Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the paper is a very interesting attempt to explain the role of regional cooperation and integration in the context of Asia. It argues that the ultimate goal of the Asian countries is to strengthen the national development strategy. And one of the most important objectives of regional cooperation is to amplify benefits and reduce the costs of integration. I fully agree. The paper characterizes Asia's RCI as institution-light in comparison to Europe. And also the paper emphasizes that Asia's RCI should ensure shared prosperity or inclusive welfare, not just pursuing high economic growth or achieving a higher income. So no disagreement. Now, what the paper does and what the paper does not. This is my sort of my summary of the paper. So I may not go through this, but one interesting point is that the paper says Asia's RCI is associated with persistent developmental asymmetries, which I think would mean development gaps among countries, and institutional fragmentation and fragile trust. Just later, I come back to this point. The paper later provides some solutions to developmental asymmetries. But institutional fragmentation and fragile trust, the paper does not seem to provide much of solutions to these last 2 points. The paper argues that Asia's RCI is institution-light, lacking a unified regional body. So the paper identifies this point, which I also agree, but does that mean that Iwan wants to see heavier, heavier institution in Asia. Does he recommend to establish a unified regional body? This was not very clear to me. I touch on this later. The paper explains a state of sub-regional cooperation and integration in Asia, mainly focusing on ASEAN, SAARC, and CARIC. And the paper also argues that the degree of trade integration in Asia is high, but the degree of integration in FDI and portfolio flows is low and lower than trade integration. And financial integration also low. And he claims that the current limited degree of financial integration is close to optimal. It was not clear to me what optimal means. What is the criteria? Is this a scientific statement, or is this just a impressionistic statement? It was not very clear. The paper makes some policy recommendations to reform WTO, vitalize RCEP, use CPTPP, work with the Global South, CMIM, reform, promote the digital economy. I think these are good points. But later I argue that perhaps the paper could have gone a few steps deeper on these issues. Okay, so the paper provides an interesting graph. Ivan did not explain this in his presentation, but this shows what the vertical axis is a standard deviation of log GDP per capita. So the decline of this is the narrowing of the development gap. So this shows that up until the mid-2000s, Asia, including ASEAN 10, developmental gap remained flat, has not improved, did not improve. But from the mid-2000s, the development gap has shrunken. First of all, why was that flat up until the mid-2000s? Why did it start declining? In a visible way from the mid-2000s. But if this declining trend continues, then the developmental gap, developmental asymmetries may not be too serious if this trend would continue. Now, this coefficient of interdependence, I did not quite understand this concept, but the paper argues that the high value means high interdependence. And it was not clear to me, this coefficient of interdependence seems to be using input-output tables, so focuses on the supply side of the economies. There are other whole host of indicators that could be taken a look at, but Ivan somehow chose to take a look at this data. And he focuses on Asia, ASEAN, PRC, China, without comparing with other parts of the world. What the paper does not do is to provide concrete solutions to reduce persistent development asymmetries, institutional fragmentation, and fragile trust, as I mentioned earlier. And also, for those people who are very familiar with RCI, maybe the current paper is okay, but perhaps I thought it would be useful to present more systematically how RCI could contribute to each economy's overarching development objectives, which might be economic and social progress with sustainability. And also what the paper does not do is to provide more systematically the types of RCI that will contribute most to each country's overarching developmental objectives. And also to provide more comprehensive data on Asia's economic integration in trade, FDI finance, and people's mobility. So my comments and questions, what is the relationship between RCI and national objectives? How does RCI contribute to national objectives? Dean Bamban, President Kanda also mentioned, perhaps to summarize this channel, a bit more, so that readers can understand the link between RCI and the ultimate national objectives. And second point, what are the important pillars of RCI today? Iwan chose to focus on trade, finance, and digital connectivity. I think they are very important, but perhaps there are other important issues. What is the current state of RCI in Asia? How has it evolved over time? These are my questions. Now, there are a few minor questions. Iwan mentioned that current global liquidity conditions are tight, restrictive. On the other hand, the Euro area started to ease monetary policy, and the United States also has started to ease monetary policy. So I believe the current concern is rather than restrictive liquidity conditions, but easing liquidity conditions, and Asia may be receiving large capital inflows from the United States, from the developed economies, Europe and United States, which could create potential problems for the future. So how to manage this may be a more important concern. The paper mentions the difference between PTA and FTA. PTA, preferential trade agreement, FTA, free trade agreement. I think PTA and FTA are the same. A more meaningful distinction is between FTA and EPA, as Japanese government does. FTA is a bit narrow, EPA is much wider. How are Asia's cross-border financial flows more dominant outside? Why are Asia's cross-border financial flows more dominant outside the region than within the region? I'm not sure if Iwan states this point, but doesn't seem to be providing his answers. Is the current limited degree of financial integration in Asia really optimal? This is a lingering question to me. And also the paper mentions the regional development financing vehicles that are said to be important in the long term. I didn't quite understand this point. The ADB, AIIB, they are not enough. It's the paper recommending to establish another development bank or such vehicles. I have just a few additional comments on trade and investment as well as financial cooperation. If I'm running out of time, please stop me, please tell me. Now, ADB had an RCI strategy in 2006, 20 years ago. It had a view that individual national efforts and RCI would contribute to poverty reduction, which was then the overarching mission of ADB's developing member countries. Today's overarching mission may be wider, economic and social progress with sustainability, national efforts, and RCI would make contributions. By the way, I would also add global integration to be also important. Then in 2006, we identified 4 pillars. By the way, I was responsible to formulating this RCI strategy 20 years ago. And Iwan, I'm sure Iwan would remember this strategy. 4 pillars: infrastructure, regional and sub-regional economic cooperation means infrastructure, and trade and investment, money and finance, and other regional public goods. Today, perhaps new additional pillars may be needed. I think one of the most important new pillars could be technology. Iwan puts digital part as part of infrastructure. I would not include digital just as part of technology because infrastructure, because that involves a much bigger issue concerning the 4th industrial revolution, AI, digital transformation. This is a digital issue is related not only to infrastructure, but to trade, to finance, and many other issues. And climate change is a very important area also. In 2006, we did not use the word climate change. We used environmental sustainability. But climate change and green transformation, much bigger issue. And labor mobility is an increasingly important issue. And already, as I show it in a few seconds, labor mobility is very, very important. So national policy efforts, RCI, and global integration are the 3 supporting instruments to help achieve each country's national objectives. And as Iwan says, the key is to maximize the benefits of RCI and global integration and minimize the costs of RCI and global integration. Just a few graphs.
You wrap up in a minute, Professor Kawai. I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Now, if you take a look at this, this compares Asia's degree of regional integration with Africa, Europe, Latin America. Asia is doing very well on FDI and movement of people. So FDI, Ivan is concerned that FDI is going out. But according to this metric, Asia is doing very well on FDI and the movement of people. Asia has slightly limited financial integration. And over time, foreign direct investment is doing well. Movement of people, Asia is doing well. And sub-regional, at the sub-regional level, there is a diversity across sub-regions in Asia. But Southeast Asia is doing very well, much better than East Asia, which I thought was very interesting. So ASEAN's experience should be promoted more. Okay, I don't have time to discuss trade and investment cooperation, macroeconomic and financial cooperation, but perhaps Ivan may want to take a look at slides here. There's just one point on Chiang Mai initiative and AMRO is that towards the bottom of this slide, good news is that the ASEAN Plus 3 has introduced the rapid financing facility, enabling timely access to emerging finance needs in response to sudden exogenous shocks, such as pandemics and natural disasters. This is a good step forward. And also ASEAN Plus 3 has started discussions on transitioning CMIM to a paid-in capital structure to further complement the global financial safety net. So ASEAN Plus 3 has made progress, but of course, more could be done. And I make several suggestions here. Asia has established institutions, maybe a regional body is needed. Maybe Ivan may have had in his mind creation of an Asian Monetary Fund and also a bigger regional trade agreement like FTA, AP. I'm not sure, but perhaps I want to hear, what Ivan's view on regional body. So the paper is interesting and useful, and the paper appropriately identifies both benefits and costs of RCI and argues that RCI can maximize benefits and minimize costs. It will be more useful if the paper spent more space to systematically present how RCI can contribute to a country's overarching development objectives, show the overall trend of economic integration in Asia, provide more concrete policy recommendations on a few issues, and ASEAN's approach to its own internal economic integration and its integration with the external partners, Asian and the rest of the world partners, could be very useful. It could be emulated in other sub-regions of Asia or other developing world. I think this point, may be pointed out. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kawai. I don't see any questions on the chat box now, and due to the time limit, I think most of the questions are and comments from Professor Kawai is already captured and encapsulated the anticipated questions that I have in mind on this presentation anyway. So let me use this last 5 minutes to give Professor Azis a chance to make a quick response to Professor Kawai's.
Okay. First of all, I thanks ADBI for inviting Kawai-san because I cannot think of a better person to discuss or, to make any presentation. Maybe he should be the one who present the paper actually. He is the most knowledgeable in terms of the RCI here, and he had a long history and experience about the RCI in Asia and so forth. Now, there are so many useful points that he highlighted. I don't know if I have time. Why don't, Kawai-san, I'm sorry if I could very quickly to each of the point that you mentioned. Okay, you asked about the fragile trust, what example, and what is the specific solution? I don't have specific solution, but let me just give you why this is so difficult. Think about South China Sea conflict. I mean, I do not have any solution. What is that? Because that is, to me, the most prominent example of lack of trust among Asian countries. Of course, I don't need to mention the name of the countries here, but that's just an example. But many others, Cambodia, Thailand conflict, Myanmar conflict, and so forth. So that's what I mean by the fragile trust. Now, institutional light, you're asking whether I'm for the heavier institution. Not at all. Being an Asian, I'm not really in favor of having strong institution. And as I said, Asia has shown that even with the institution light, it has been already showing a good performance and so forth. The thing is, because the new challenge is coming in the coming years due to geopolitical situation and so on, I think it's not so much making a stronger institution or making more formal secretariat and so on. No, I think it's the substance has to be more related to the development capacity. And this is where I'm going to me, the most important comment from you is really the link between RCI and development capacity. If I may, I know I don't have much time. Yandi, can I share the screen here quickly?
Sure.
Because as I said, I'm given only 8,000 words in the paper. So this is basically, by the way, I'm writing another paper for ADB, not ADB Institute, for ADB, because ADB is asking me to write paper. So this is from my paper for ADB about RCI. So this is how I see the link between RCI and the national development. RCI is always creating externalities. Some are positive externalities, some are negative externalities. Now, how do we maximize the positive one and minimize the negative one? That's the cooperation. So the integration create externalities. The cooperation manages that externalities, which is some are positive, some are negative. Why the positive needs to be maximized and the negative needs to be minimized? Because it will help the national development capacity, whether it is through, the national institution in each country or through, supranational institutions like ADB or, APEC or AFTA or whatever. So the whole idea about cooperation, taking care of the externalities caused by integration, is really to support the development capacity. And in fact, in my paper for ADB, I conclude, because when we talk about national development capacity, we cannot generalize. There are so many countries and they're so different. So in that paper, I show an example that so far, in general, of course, there are some exceptions, but in general, some country in Asia fail to translate the RCI to support the national development capacity. And I give a lot of examples. Of so many variables, my favorite one is productivity. And the growth of productivity in almost all Asian countries has been declining in the last few years. This is the reasons why the last year of my time in ADB, I tried to focus on the trend of productivity in Asia. And at that time, back in 2015, I think, in 2015, I already cautioned that Asia is facing a major problems in the coming years, and that is the declining growth of productivity. So to me, RCI can be a vehicle that help, sort of stop that trend of the declining productivity. Anyway, so that's my short sort of response. Now, the RCI pillar. You mentioned about pillar. You're absolutely right. And thank you again, Kawai, because back in 2005, I think you established those 4 pillars. Yes, I focus on those 2 of the 4 pillars in this paper, and that is trade, investment, and financial sector. But there's also another pillar which you, back in 2005, tried to highlight, and that is the importance of sub-regional cooperation. So it's not just Asia overall, it's not just ASEAN or ASEAN plus 3, but sub-regional. And the reason is, I think I mentioned in my presentation earlier, we are not only aiming at raising the income of every member of the Asian countries, but we try to help the weak members, because in every organization, there's always weak members. I remember during my time in ADB, we always talk about CMLV, Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam. But now Vietnam is no longer CMLV, actually. So that kind of things is really, which to me is a bit overlooked, because too many analysts looking at RCI, looking at the growth of the strong member countries, but not so much the weak member. And that's why I really want to highlight that chart of the declining trend of the coefficient of variation, which shows there is a trend of convergence. Now, you're asking me earlier why there is a flat trend and then all of a sudden decline, right? Well, to me, it's an indication that the cooperation within Asia is working well, because the declining trend, partly, I'm not saying entirely because of the RCI, but partly because, example being in ASEAN plus 3, I know there's a special fund provided by plus 3 to help weak members of the ASEAN for training. So that is an example that you raise the human capacity so that the contribution in individual country to raise their income, to increase their welfare and so forth is also elevated. So again, the cooperation is really working quite well. And that to me partly explains why the trend has been declining. And I think the last one that I can you're asking about development financing institution. No, again, by now, I hope you know me, Kawai-san. I'm not in favor of having new institution, financial development. No, I'm not in favor of that. If anything, I'm really trying to focus on any existing institution, ADB or AIIB, trying to focus on what individual country needs. Because when individual country gets stronger, the region got stronger. But how do we do that? It's not top-down by looking at the region first, but looking at individual countries. So any development financing institution can help channel all the resources and all the attention to help individual member to improve. Now, one clear example is the MSME, the small medium enterprise. In all Asian countries, if you look at the unit, I'm not talking about the output, but the unit of business, in all Asian countries, no exception, the highest share is MSME. In fact, if you take out plus 3, in all Asian countries, more than 90%, more than 90% of the business unit are small, medium enterprise. Now, think about this. In any FTA, whether it's in RCEP or in ASEAN, in AFTA and so forth, what is their contribution? Very small. If you ever attend this agreement of the FTA and so forth, none. I haven't seen any participant that represent the MSME. Usually the big companies represented that. No wonder if you look at the data of the contribution of SME in each of the Asian countries in the trade generated through the FTA, very small. Okay, so that is one area where I think we can help them, because once you do that, automatically the domestic development capacity will improve. I'm talking about inequality, because you know very well, Kawai-san, inequality is very bad in many countries. So if we can strengthen the SME, I think the inequality issue and socio-economic conditions will be improved. I'm sorry, I'm taking too much time here. Thank you.
Apologies for time limitation. I personally would like to continue hearing both of you talking about the topic. It's very interesting. So I'm really looking forward for the revised version of the paper and the discussion contribution from Professor Kawai. I think both write-up would be very much looked forward to by academics as well as policymakers. And I believe that the ideas being put into it will help us or the region to move forward with a better planning and strategy to approach this regional cooperation and integration. Let me thank Professor Azis and Professor Kawai for their contribution. Thank you very much, and I look forward for the write-up, final write-up of this presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, let me move to the second presentation. The second